All right, so this is the Modern Merlin with paganpages.org, and I am interviewing the wonderful Coby Michael. You might recognize him as the author of The Poison Path Herbal. Let me take the blur off of my background here. There we go. The Poison Path Herbal, and also The Poison Path Grimoire. Now, Coby, I've been into the Poison Path for witchcraft, occultism for about 7 years now. How did you get started in the path?
Well, I've always been interested in plants, and it wasn't long before I discovered the use of poisonous and entheogenic plants in ritual and ceremony, sort of through the lens of traditional witchcraft with the witch's sabbat, spirit flight, um, interacting with spirit familiars through the aid of members of the nightshade family.
Mm.
My initial occult research and studies relating to herbalism, pretty much just devouring like any kind of herbal folklore that I could find. But in the resources that I was coming across, there was maybe like brief mentions of poisonous plants, but not a lot of really like practical stuff to go off of.
Hmm.
So it wasn't until I kind of got introduced to this idea of the witch's flying ointment and the use of entheogenic nightshades in the practice of spirit flight that I kind of became aware of the fact that there was some kind of like historical basis to working with these plants in a magical context, and that there was the chemistry that supported that.
Hmm. So I actually started my path in a similar way. I don't know if you're familiar with the book Besom, Stang, and Sword.
Yeah.
So they talked about using, Atropa belladonna as well as I think like henbane and other, poisonous plants for inducing the witch flight. And
Mhm.
that's kind of what got me started down that path. I eventually started kind of experimenting. I did eat some just like raw nightshade berries. It was bittersweet, so it was nothing, too crazy. But
Mhm.
yeah, I just, it's been a fascinating journey, and it's so much more than just inducing witch flight or spirit flight. It is about healing the physical body and the energetic body and the soul as well. It's helped me, especially like belladonna, has really helped me get into the core of my shadow work. What kind of shadow work practices do you like to use with poisonous plants, and what plants or plant allies do you like to use for that purpose?
Well, so the entheogenic and mind-altering effects of these plants kind of seem to be something that people become hyper focused on. But there's also, a lot more that they have to offer, especially within a spiritual context. And then they've got all of their physical medicinal properties and precedents of different ways that they've been used in herbal medicine for centuries. When it comes to shadow work, I feel like the baneful herbs, the plants of the poison path, the members of the nightshade family, they all kind of connect to a lot of those darker themes that we typically encounter when we're doing shadow work. So things like fear, anger, anxiety, shame, sexual trauma, addiction, just sort of like the laundry list of like psychological things that we all have sort of floating around that we're trying to heal and work through. The nightshades in particular seem to resonate with those things on a very deep level, and they're able to offer healing through empowerment. So really being able to not only embody those qualities to get a deeper sense of, what they actually mean to the individual, but being able to bring those qualities up and outside of us so that we can almost, sit across from our shadow selves and kind of enter into a dialogue. So just working with the plants, having them in close proximity, encountering them on a regular basis, they tend to bring up a lot of these spiritual toxins,
Mhm.
and toxic attachments, emotions, harmful thought patterns, harmful behaviors. They tend to kind of bring those things up to the surface, which there is a little bit of transition period where it can get a little messy. But the idea with that is that through the support of those plant allies, that we're able to not only integrate the shadow, but to partner with it in a way that turns it into a spiritual ally for empowerment.
It's kind of like solve that coagula, the phrase written on Baphomet's arms, right?
Mhm.
It's just transmutation. I've definitely found, and belladonna's been the main plant ally that I've focused on. I've also kind of focused on some others. Foxglove is a really popular one for me, especially with its fairy connection. Um, but I will say that, when I talk to people who want to get into the poison path and working with these poisonous plants, they just want to jump right in. And that is not the approach that I partake in personally. I spent 2 to 3 years researching before I ever even consumed any of the plants because I wanted to get to know them, not just scientifically, but also spiritually, working with the plant spirit itself.
Mhm.
Um, and from what I've read in your books, our journeys have been a little similar in that regard. The essences of these plants seem to kind of come across the same to a lot of people. There's multiple oracle decks out there that mention these poisonous plants and other plant allies that work with them, and the energies all kind of seem to be the same, regardless of your theory of where that comes from. My first experience when I actually consumed belladonna, which not actually eating it, but in a salve form, scared the actual crap out of me. The falling sensation is intense if you're not ready for it. And then using your belladonna oil, actually, it's been a lot easier for me. I don't quite know what the difference is, but your products have been a lifesaver for me. I'm not the crafty type, so to speak. Um, so where did you kind of, or how did you form your formularies for all of your products? And for those that don't know, Coby owns and is the proprietor of the Poisoner's Apothecary, where he actually sells a lot of these items that he mentions in his books.
Yeah, so I'm really happy to hear that they've been helpful for you. All of the feedback that I get in regards to the flying ointments, the ritual oils, seems to be pretty good. I haven't had anybody reach out and be like, "Oh, this was terrible. Like, I hated it, so I must be doing something right." Um, when it comes to the actual formulation, I looked to sort of clinical herbalism, traditional folk medicine, and just going through like old herbal manuscripts to kind of see how these plants were actually used within a medical context. Because the nightshades in particular, also things like aconite or wolfsbane and foxglove are really important in medicinal herbalism. So it's all about, the dosage, how they're used, the different circumstances that they're applied in, but they are, kind of the root or source of a lot of our most important medicines. So with the formulation for flying ointments and spiritual applications, I was kind of looking to um, more of the medicinal herbalism to sort of form a threshold or a starting place, because that's one of the things that I sort of encountered first starting out on this path, and that a lot of other people encounter too, is like, okay, you start growing this plant, you want to work with it, you want to make formulas with it, but like, where do you start? And just kind of knowing that it's poisonous and that it has all of these like potentially dangerous possibilities, it kind of leaves you in a place of like, not really knowing where to go. So with the medicinal herbalism, I was able to establish like basically precedents where, okay, the Atropa belladonna, it was used in a liniment for pain, or tinctures for, gastrointestinal issues, and this is the way that it was prepared, and this is the dosage that they used, and the formulas that they used to kind of go off of that. Because then it just becomes a matter of how much you apply or how much you ingest and where you apply it, and sort of like the ritual context that you wrap around it that determines its effectiveness. And it's just a matter of increasing the dosage until you get to where you want to be. So that's how I started with a lot of the formulas, kind of, reverse engineering the medicinal recipes that were out there. But it was kind of tricky to nail that down because a lot of it's kind of fallen out of fashion. Um,
A lot of the
as far
methods
as
that were used back then are just not known today or not widely practiced, shall we say. So, um, yeah, I had a lot of issues when I was trying to find a reliable recipe to make my own ointments at first, which when I finally found that you were selling stuff, I was just like, oh, thank the gods. It can be a lot for someone that wants to do it themselves. So, you know, and kind of getting back to the medicinal end of these plants and the spiritual end too, again, they're more than just entheogens, and for those that aren't familiar, an entheogen is essentially it's a plant that induces a visionary state or it entheogen from the etymology, from what I understand, it kind of relays the idea of connecting with the divine, becoming one with the divine. There's so much more than that, though. Witches use them in herbal spells. I was looking in, I believe it was the Poison Path Herbal here. Yeah, the Poison Path Herbal, where you mention a home protection wreath with bittersweet nightshade, which I've actually done the ritual multiple times. And I've included foxglove in it as well to kind of bring in that prosperity, that love into the house, and that passion into the house. Did you have like a particular source that you found all these rituals, or was it kind of just a trial and error as you went along?
the rituals in particular are, I'm trying to think if I can think of any that are not ones that I came up with or wrote on my own or just through like personal experience, or plant gnosis came up with these. So the bittersweet nightshade wreath in particular, I think that came from the idea of just basically like people would take the vines of bittersweet nightshade and hang them above doorways, or they would hang them in the barn, similarly to the way that they would a lot of other plants as well, for protection of the home or to keep witches or evil spirits out. So just kind of adapting that into, um, making a wreath. I think gosh, when was it that I did that? I think 2016, 2017. And I don't know how much of it is just like intuition or just tapping into like existing folk knowledge of the way that people have used plants historically. So it just kind of made sense to make a wreath out of it, I guess.
A lot of the part of being a poison witch or working in the poison herbal path is intuition, frankly. Um, within a certain range, yeah, we can be safe. We do have some scientific data on, how do these plants actually work and why do they do what they do to us? But at the end of the day, you just kind of have to trust your gut. Um, and I'm not one of those people that has to have an authentic source for everything. A lot of the time, the most powerful magic is the stuff that comes from you. So personally, I can appreciate that you've included so many authentic rituals, or that came, like you said, from plant gnosis. I've had a lot of similar experiences where, oh, Mandragora wants me to use it this way, and I've never thought of using it for that, but okay, let's do it. Um, so, for those that are wanting to get into the path, where would you recommend they start?
Well, I would definitely read my books.
Yes, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, I think they're very good, like introductory level, introducing like all of the foundations, all of the important terminology, because a lot of what is of interest to quote the poison path comes from ethnobotany and anthropological research that has been done like all over the world in the way that other societies, particularly indigenous peoples, are using their plant medicines. So in the West, a lot of the plants that we call poison have these entheogenic effects and are understood very differently in other parts of the world. So when it comes to looking at like a really broad global scope of a variety of different plants and their chemical constituents, the way that they're used in ritual, ceremony, religious practice. You're drawing from a lot of different sources, so having some of that academic terminology is just helpful for people to kind of find their own path and go down their own rabbit holes when it comes to gathering information on working with these plants. And there are a few other books out there that are, really good that I would recommend, like anything by Christian Roch and Claudia Mueller-Ebling. So the Encyclopedia of Psychoactive Plants. They also wrote a book called Witchcraft Medicine, which isn't strictly poisonous plants. It includes a lot of other plants that are associated with witchcraft and, shamanic type practices. So that's a really good one. Um, but yeah.
I'm gonna definitely have to go in a rabbit hole with those two because I haven't heard those. Second here. So as far as the spirit allies, and kind of, I call it making friends with the plant, if you will. I'm not going to go harvest something if, spiritually I'm in touch with it. I'm not going to just go harvest it without first asking permission. But on top of that, I want to make friends with it too, especially if it is one of the more poisonous or dangerous ones. Um, and I really appreciate your approach to that in your books. A lot of it is just simply sitting down, shutting up, and listening to what the plant is trying to tell you, whether you're growing it or you encounter it in the wild. A lot of my nature walks here in Ohio, I just come across it. It'll be kind of hidden in the brush, and then I'll look and I'm like, oh, that's so and so. Um, so it's really, a big one that grows here in Ohio now is poison hemlock. So
Mhm.
that's a plant that, I was terrified of because I have respiratory issues and it's known to cause those. But as I keep seeing it growing, I've actually began making friends with it. Now I'm not to the point where I want to start working with it magically, but I'm comfortable being around it now. Whereas before I had this fear. And I think that kind of ties into, in terms of the spiritual end of the plants, they always kind of know those repressed parts of ourselves. Um, Belladonna has made me face a lot of personal shame and self doubt and things like that. But hemlock almost seems like, it kind of gets to like a past life thing for me. Have you had experiences like that where they've almost kind of said, it's not from this one, and I don't know what your personal beliefs are in reincarnation, but a lot of people in the pagan community do share that belief. So,
Mhm.
have you ever had an experience like that?
When it comes to reincarnation and past lives, if I just sit down and think about it, it kind of starts to make my head spin.
It's a lot, yeah.
So, like, I definitely think that it's a thing, but for me, it's just really hard to, I guess, conceptualize from the physical body that I'm currently existing in.
Yeah.
But I do definitely see how they they come for you, and you do have sort of that initial sense of like fear and trepidation, and I think that that's part of like the shadow work that comes with being willing to work with these plants, is kind of overcoming that fear through understanding and being aware of like where is it coming from? And then you become more familiar with the plant spirit, and its, physical presence, and learn more about it and how it behaves and what its actions are. And then you really kind of come to the realization that, maybe it wasn't as terrible or taboo as you initially thought that it was. And that's sort of been my experience with working with all of these plants is, they get this red letter label of like the word poison, and to us that means one single thing, and that means that it causes death.
Hmm.
But it's not that black and white. Like there's all of these different qualities that can make a plant poisonous. Some of them cause death, some of them cause discomfort, and even the most deadly ones, like it's all about the circumstances and the dosage. Was it fresh? Was it dried? What was the individual
Hmm.
constitution of the person that ingested it? Was it accidental or intentional? Did they go to the hospital? Were they not able to go to the hospital? Like there's all of these factors that come into play. And, um, it's a very kind of like nuanced thing of what poison actually is. And that's really kind of been an interesting part of my own exploration, is kind of realizing poison as a concept or metaphor, or, a type of energy that gets applied to these different things.
It kind of brings me to this notion of the devil in witchcraft. Um, and it's interesting because you see a lot of books and a lot of people writing about it now, especially me. I've been kind of in this Gnostic deep dive with that figure, the witch father, or, Cain, whatever you want to call him. It, he seems to resonate with these poisonous plants, I think, more than any other figure or archetype in the spiritual and witchcraft community. And I think it's because he is the literal scapegoat for all of these things that, as humans, we have just kind of shoved to the status of other. And so poison got shoved to the status of other as well. And so those plants took on various attributes. Mandrake is kind of the seductive, lovey-dovey. To me, it's comparable in energy to like Jezebel root, so to speak. But then you go to Atropa belladonna, and that is almost straight up Lilith energy as far as the seduction and the sexual prowess that that plant embodies. So, getting back to that, devil energy, how has that impacted your path with poison witchcraft? Because I don't think that there is a certain point in the poison witch journey, at least in mine, where he was unavoidable. You couldn't deny him, even though as a pagan you want to deny everything that has to do with the Abrahamic faith, which includes the devil, Satan, whatever you want to call it. But he is an actual real figure. He's just not what the Christians necessarily say he is. What have your experiences been like that? You mentioned the green devil, the devil's berries with belladonna. It just constantly comes up.
Right. And, being pagan and being polytheistic, it leaves room for the devil.
Hmm.
And the devil, in all of its many forms, is definitely something that is sort of intimately wound into the poison path, whether it's this idea of the horned god or the witch father, or hearkening back to like a pre-Christian time of like nature deities and fertility and virility, or even our own personal devils and adversaries, however you sort of conceptualize that, it is part of the poison path and part of this botanical shadow work. And the call that these plants have sort of comes from that realm of otherness. And poison and poisonous plants in general kind of represent that opposition, in that they are demonized and ostracized and kept separate from other more socially acceptable plants. Just like the people that have used them, you know, folk herbalists, specifically women, other marginalized people, in many cases to kind of tip the scales in their favor, whether it's through manipulation of a lover for social advancement or the complete, neutralization of a person or a situation that is causing you harm or standing in your way. It's, to me, all of that sort of personal empowerment and personal advancement that we would kind of identify a little bit more with the left-hand path, because it gives us permission to look out for ourselves and to not only claim what is ours, but to give ourselves permission and feel worthy to claim that empowerment, because society has become so good at telling us that we are, not worthy, that we're just a number in this grand sort of hellscape machine that we all live in.
The capitalist dystopia.
Yeah. So,
And I think that scares a lot of people too, because again, the people that are willing to embrace the poisons, we're essentially saying we're embracing taboo. We
mhm.
are embracing our own personal power, and that goes against the grain of what mainstream society is taught. So, in a lot of ways, this is a very left-hand path practice. It's very adversarial, but it doesn't mean that you're necessarily, hexing and cursing people all the time. The left-hand path is not just black magic. That's, I think, an instance of very few and far between people. And I'm not going to drop names, but there are some people out there writing books that I see on Amazon, and I'm just like, come on. Anyway, you know, it's not just casting hexes and curses. And, I'm hex positive even. There are instances where sometimes you have to. And if you look historically, at, say, the Gospel of Aradia, they talk and hint at using poisonous plants in their rituals because that was their way of finding the salvation at the time. And drawing a lot of social parallels, you can see things progressing in a similar manner now in our current day and age, especially in the United States. Um, so I think that the poison path is going to continue to grow, as well as witchcraft, especially traditional witchcraft. I think a lot of the more mainstream witchcraft stuff that we've seen is going to kind of fall out of favor, as society kind of figures its stuff out. Um, that being said, there is a growing interest in the Amanita family.
Mhm.
Um, Now, I've used Muscaria and Pantherina, personally, and you do mention them in your books, but there are some that are markedly more dangerous, like Destroying Angel, for instance. Um, what are your thoughts on those as far as how they fit into the poison path and also, your experiences with them, both spiritually and also ingesting if you have?
Well, there are, like you mentioned, some of the Amanitas that will just outright kill you,
Mm-hmm.
like the Death Cap and the Destroying Angel. There's some other lookalikes out there, so it's super important, especially if you're harvesting your own and going out and foraging for them, that you're able to identify, beyond any shadow of a doubt that you have something that's not going to kill you. And mushroom poisoning in particular is a very vicious and miserable way to die.
Yeah.
There's as much love and admiration and gratitude out there for Amanita muscaria as there is phobias and hatred. And if you go on to like any of the Amanita mushroom groups, like anytime you see a post about it, it gets these really like polarized and vitriolic reactions of people like, singing praise as to how much it helped them, how much they love it, how it saved their lives. And then you get other people that that are like, this mushroom is poisonous, this is deadly, you don't know what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of like very passionate people when it comes to Amanita muscaria. As far as the Death Cap and the Destroying Angel, those are two that I haven't encountered out in the wild. So I don't really have any information as far as like working with them. I know that there are some Poison Path practitioners that have done Death Cap and Destroying Angel mushroom essences. So working with them energetically in that way. But on the Amanita, that's one that I'm really drawn to work with, more so even than the psilocybin mushrooms, the magic
Yeah,
mushrooms that we're all familiar with. Um, while the experience is a little bit different, I don't know, Amanita just does it for me, I think, in a way that the other ones don't. Um,
it's funny. Psilocybin almost carries more recreational energy to me than Amanita does, where anytime that I've
they're more
done,
fun.
yeah, yeah, they're more fun, but they're not good spiritually for me. I've never had success with it. But Amanita, at least the safe ones that I've found, um, they really, I can see why the Druids and the Celts used them so much, and why they have been so popular in Europe as the number one entheogenic plant that they used in ancient times.
Mhm.
Um, that said, cannabis is another similar one. And I myself use cannabis, every day for medical issues. But, even that can cause poisonous, so to speak, reactions. Cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, where you've basically overconsumed and now your body's flooded with it. And, you can't manage your peristalsis and your digestive system. So you're vomiting constantly. And it just gets back to this core idea. And I really want to close with this for people that might be on the fence because I'm kind of gearing this towards them. There's a lot of interest, but I think people are kind of afraid. In the right dose, a poison can be a medicine, just like
Mhm.
in the wrong dose, a medicine is a poison. So, say you take, a medicine for blood pressure. Well, if you take too much, your blood pressure is going to go low, and that totally defeated the purpose. The same can be said with, amanita, psilocybin, atropa belladonna, aconite, any of these plants. Um, it's really just a matter of inverting the old, at least to me, the old adage that the witch who cannot hex cannot heal. Um, that's kind of the core belief of the poison path, it seems. If you could sum it up in one sentence, it would be that, at least to me. Um, Closing out here, what are your thoughts on that? Is that pretty in line with how you approach it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I was always kind of attracted to the dark side when it comes to these plants. I think that's why I found them in the first place. But I think that it's important to remember, that they are power plants, they're master plant spirits. They are, plant spirit medicine, just like any other sacred ceremonial herb or mushroom or herbal preparation, from tobacco to ayahuasca to San Pedro, all having this entheogenic potential. So they are, just as much light bringers and powerful partners for healing and transformation. Just because they have this sort of balance between dark and light, it doesn't mean that, if you are not okay with some of those darker energies or not ready to kind of go into that shadow work, that you can't, work with plants of the poison path for um, healing, transformation from more of a an illuminated point of view.
Exactly. I actually have a friend who grows belladonna, and or not belladonna. I'm sorry, the Torah, and she makes an ointment that helps with pain.
Mhm.
Um, and you don't have to use it, like you said, you don't have to use it necessarily just for spiritual purposes. It's like you said, digitalis was the um, compound in foxglove that is now synthetically produced in heart medicine. Datura is, from what I have read and researched, um, they're starting to think of it as potentially an alternative to opioids for pain relief, which is wonderful. I mean, let's get these people off. That's
Mhm.
this nasty stuff that they're getting addicted to, which then also, in my opinion, it raises more spiritual issues for people too, because addiction affects the whole being. Um, and just to close out, I have had a lot of healing experiences with these plant allies, as you have as well. What would be, besides reading your books, which I would wholeheartedly recommend to anybody interested in this path, what would be your piece of advice for starting out, besides reading your books and doing their own research?
I mean, just follow what calls out to you. If there's a specific plant that piques your interest or, just looks interesting or for whatever like wordless reason calls out to you, kind of follow that and, dive deeper or research as much as you can. Pay attention to what's growing around you, just out in your own local environment. Maybe not right now since it's like the dead of winter. But you'd be surprised what poisonous plants pop up around you. And then kind of looking into their history, their folklore, their medicinal uses, if there are any, which I would say for the majority of plants there are. You can get insight into what their spiritual message may be, or why you're noticing that plant in particular. That can kind of give you insight into your own, sort of whatever's going on in your world at that time.
So it's kind of like, I'm sure you've seen the memes where people say they just go to the crystal shop and they pick out whatever one calls to them. It's kind of like that, right? For me, it was belladonna, just something about the way that she looks, the name, the color,
Mhm.
all of it just called out to me. And I mean, I'm sure you can tell that's the plant that I have the deepest relationship with.
Mhm.
Even outside of just the poison path purview, I think I've worked with that plant more extensively than others, for sure. So, I want to encourage people to not only read your books, but to expand their horizons. I think there's a lot of people that previously might not have pursued this path or felt a call to it, but for whatever collective reason we have going on right now, I think that there is an increase in interest. So I want to personally thank you for your work, your contributions to the field. My poison path journey would not be where it is without your work. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. It means a lot, and just keep doing what I'm doing, and think the plants or whatever spirits are connected to them kind of move me along in these different directions. So,
Yeah, yeah, it's about the same for me. So,
yeah,
well, thank you so much, Kobe, and I hope you have a wonderful week.
yeah. Thank you for having me. Nice talking with you.
Nice talking with you too. Bye.
Bye bye.